Why do we have such a hang-up about science that it is still separate, a kind of separate thing from all of other human culture? Science is a human activity, and to be a scientist, you have to study and you have to understand how it works, like anything else in life. But it should be there for everyone to enjoy as well, and for everyone to understand. Not just understand, but to appreciate as well. And so that's what I mean by science should be for everyone. Everyone should be allowed to talk about science. Everyone should be invited to the party, I suppose, is what I mean.
Time is X minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Preparing for Launch, where we want to help you with your career in space through entertainment, education, advice, and insights. Joining us today, we have Dallas Campbell speaking about science communication, the power of storytelling, and advice on how you can get involved in the space sector. So, hi Dallas, thank you so much for coming along and being here today. Could you introduce yourself to all our listeners?
Hi, I'm Dallas Campbell, and I am what am I? Gosh, well, I'm a science television presenter, and I worked a lot for lots of different broadcasters over the years, for many years. I worked for the BBC for a long time on science programs like Bang Goes the Theory and Supersize Earth and City in the Sky and Britain Beneath Your Feet and programs like that. Also, I've worked for Nat Geo a lot. I'm currently doing a series for Nat Geo called Science of Stupid, which pretty much does what it says on the tin. I'm also very interested and have made lots of programs about the space sector, about spaceflight, particularly human spaceflight, and I've written a book about human spaceflight. So that's me.
The first thing that I want to ask about is something that you said that has really resonated with me, and that was that you aim to show that science is for everyone, not just scientists. Now, what does that really mean to you?
God, I've been saying that a lot. I've been saying that for years and years and years. I think the thing is, it seems to have this thing about science that, I tell you what it is. The question that I get asked the most, because I'm a non-science. I didn't study science, so I'm not a scientist, but I write about science and make programs about science, is that people always assume that anyone who talks about science must be a scientist, which is a ridiculous thing, because it's a bit like saying that anyone who listens to music must be a musician, or anyone who watches Netflix must be a TV producer. And I suppose my thing is, why do we have such a hang-up about science that it is still separate, a kind of separate thing from all of other human culture? Science is a human activity, and to be a scientist, you have to study and you have to understand how it works, like anything else in life. But it should be there for everyone to enjoy as well, and for everyone to understand. Not just understand, but to appreciate as well. And so that's what I mean by science should be for everyone. Everyone should be allowed to talk about science. Everyone should be invited to the party, I suppose, is what I mean. A bit like anyone can listen to music without actually having to be a pianist.
Yeah, I remember when I heard that quote, I was so excited to hear it because I was like, yes, like someone agrees that people can talk about science and it can be in the news and you can read magazines and books about it when you're not actually a scientist.
Yeah, it's really funny. I still get it a lot. Well, not a lot, but it's, people sort of come talk to me on sort of social media, go, you're not a scientist, are you? Like as if somehow I've sort of tricked them, or as if somehow I'm pretending to be a scientist. I'm not a scientist, and I'm also not a pianist, but I also like listening to Beethoven. It's a weird thing, and I've been sort of banging on about this thing for bloody years, and still people are like, oh yeah, how come you science, why do you like science? It's just such a weird thing. So that's what I mean. Even the fact that we have terms like science communicator or science communication, I just think is ridiculous. No other area of life do we have kind of art communicators or sort of novel communicators. I don't know why it should just be a thing. We shouldn't have to label it. I think that's my point.
That's so true. I guess in school right now, you would never say, oh, you're an English student. Oh, you can only be the one to read fiction.
I know, it's
Oh, you
it's insane.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're not you went to the theatre, you must be an actor. No. It's like,
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
if you want to be on the stage, you've got to train and you've got to understand what being an actor's about or being a director. I get that. And likewise with science, if you actually want to do the science, then you've got to train and you've got to know what you're doing. But for us mere mortals to appreciate and to understand and be able to be part of the conversation, then less so. I mean, I say that, but it's the sort of trying to get rid of the us and themness of science. I think that's my point. There's too much us and them. It's like scientists and then everyone else, and it shouldn't be like that.
That's so true. It is really important to target everyone because it does affect everyone. And at one point in your life, having a basic knowledge of science is something you should just have.
Yeah, and I think actually we don't really at schools we don't really talk about what science is. We talk about we kind of drill into the detail too much too early on, and people don't really appreciate what science is. Science at its heart is uncertainty, is being uncertain, and that's something that I don't think people really appreciate. People think that science is a kind of book of knowledge, and of course it's not that. Science is about uncertainty. It's about making the best assumptions based on the data that you have, which is constantly under review. And I think if people sort of understood that a bit more about what science is and what scientists do all day, then it would help. But we don't, because people just get confused. They think it's all science. They know. All these scientists think they know everything. It's like, no, we don't. Scientists don't know anything. And everything scientists know at the moment will be wrong or subject to change later on when different data comes.
Exactly. Now, speaking of data and change, scientific research is all about testing new hypotheses, data, and ongoing theories. And with that word theory, I remember always being confused on why things like the theory of gravity and the Big Bang were always caused that, because obviously they're proved. And I remember I asked that once in class, and my teacher explained that everything in science is a theory. It's just an ongoing development, and these quote-unquote theories are proved. But the more we learn about them and more data we accumulate, the more we add to this theory and kind of evidence for the Big Bang theory. So the Big Bang theory is proved and the theory of gravity was proved, but the more we learn about our universe, the more evidence we have.
Yeah, it's a really good point, actually. Well, the word theory is one of those words that everyone gets very confused about, because when you guys say the word theory, you mean something completely different to when the general populace say the word theory. When I say, I've got a theory about that, what I actually mean is I've got some half-baked idea. But of course, a theory is the best thing going. A theory, Einstein's theory of gravity or Newton's theory of gravity is something that's demonstrable. It's the description of a physical event or a physical law of nature. It doesn't mean the same thing as when you or Joe Bloggs in the pub says, I've got a theory about that. So when non-scientists hear the word theory, they assume it means that scientists don't know what they're talking about, and it's exactly the opposite of that. So it's a kind of linguistic problem.
I think it's another reason why the whole population should be educated on science, like I said before, not just for scientists. Because if everyone knew that, then they would accept these theories more.
Yeah, it's like Darwin, creationists and people who believe in things like intelligent design go, aha, yes, Darwin's theory of evolution. It was only a theory. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of the scientific usage of the word theory. Darwin's theory of evolution is the same as Newton's theory of gravity. Gravity actually exists. It's a real thing. And evolution is a real thing just as much as gravity is. And the theory is the thing that describes it. It doesn't mean it's just an idea that may or may not exist or not.
Exactly. What inspired you to first start getting interested and involved in science?
It's really funny because I was terrible at science at school. I had no interest in science as a subject at school, and partly because I just didn't get it. It didn't get it. And I think it's because when I was at school, we were too busy, drilling down into the detail. And actually, I think the really important thing at school when you're young, particularly, well, certainly when you become a sort of teenager, is you need to step back from the canvas a bit and see the wonder of science and actually see the poetry of science. And then you can go, now I get it. And then you can kind of drill down, a little bit deeper. And I never really had that at school. I mean, when I was very young, like all kids, when we're little, we're all natural born scientists. We play with Lego, we make paper airplanes, and, we poke tadpoles in the pond, and all those things. We're naturally curious about the world around us. But, as I got older, I, didn't really sort of get into science as a subject at school. I was much more involved in the arts. And it wasn't until, I don't know, probably my early to mid 20s. There was a couple of things, actually. The first thing was I chanced upon a VHS copy, and it was Richard Dawkins' Christmas lecture. I think it was 1991 or 1992. And I remember watching that Christmas lecture and thinking, my God, for the first time, biology made sense, and biology was interesting, and biology was exciting, because he's such a good explainer, and tells the story of natural selection and evolution so well. It was absolutely mind-blowing, and that was a real sort of seminal moment in my life. That was one thing. Second thing was, I used to work with a theatre director, a guy called Campbell, and Ken did a really nice series for Channel 4 round about the same kind of time as that. And it was called Reality on the Rocks. And it was basically Ken, who, like me, came from an acting background, who wanted and had no scientific knowledge, but wanted to understand the secrets of the universe, and went to meet Stephen Hawking and went to CERN and did all these amazing things. And it suddenly occurred to me, and I helped him do this program, and I was working with Ken at that time. It suddenly occurred to me that actually you can talk about science without being a scientist. You can make a science program coming from the layman not really understanding stuff, finding things out, rather than being a professor telling the audience stuff. And actually working with Ken, doing programs like that, was a real kind of eye-opener for me. And that was, a couple of things that really set me on my course doing what I do now. And sort of books that I read as well. I mean, there was Carl Sagan's book, Demon Haunted World, was a book that kind of completely changed the way I saw the world and thought about science. The Ascent of Man, Jacob Bronowski's BBC series, which I watched, which absolutely fundamentally changed the way I thought about things. So it was a combination of books, of people that I met, people I worked with, and television.
Is there a best way to communicate science through media? How do you excite people about science on TV? I feel like there's an art to doing this.
Well, it depends what you want to do. I mean, here we are right in the middle of a pandemic. So science communication has a specific function, which is to inform the public about what's going on. And a lot of that involves having the ability to be able to get over this idea of uncertainty. The thing is, politicians, for example, don't like uncertainty. They want certainty when they talk to the public. And science is all about error bars, and actually being honest about that, and being honest about how science actually works, and how the numbers actually work, and how uncertainty and statistics and risk actually works. Being able to do that clearly, that's one form of science communication. But the other thing as well is, as I mentioned, like, science is poetry, science is wonder. The natural world is a wonderful thing. When we watch a David Attenborough documentary, we are full of the wonder of science, and that comes down to good storytelling. This is less about the actual science in a way. If we talk about sort of science communication, this is as much about the communication, how to structure story, understanding how stories work. Human beings are story animals. We've evolved to tell stories. We've evolved to absorb stories. We understand innate story structure. But for me personally, I'm the type of person who is much more on the sort of story side of things, if you like, rather than, I'm not a science journalist in that sense, in the sense of trying to tell the public information about a pandemic or whatever it might be.
So do you think that's why it's really important for audiences to see a diverse range of scientific, not communicators, but presenters?
Yeah.
How can this be achieved? How can people have a wide range of scientific communicators, presenters?
Well,
sorry.
I think diversity in science we'll use the word science communicators for the sake of it, even though I hate it.
Sorry, I wrote it down on my notes.
No, it's good. But I think, diversity is really, really important, because if you only see a type of person talking about science or presenting science, and that's not you, then of course you're going to see it as only as other. So I think diversity in terms of all types of diversity, gender and class, particularly, the trouble is science, because to be a scientist, you have to go to university and study, and that it generally attracts a more sort of upper middle class type of person who can afford to do that and has that kind of background. So I think all these different areas of diversity, it's really important for people to be able to feel they can talk about science, because it's that old adage, you need to be able to see it to be it.
Exactly. How does talking about space differ from the rest of science? Because I feel like everyone loves talking about space, but not everyone loves talking about physics as much as I do.
Well, I think there's sort of natural reasons why it's nice talking about space, because it's space is really visual, so we can make programs about it because it's pretty and there's planets and stars and da 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 da. Also, there's the idea of space is such an easy idea for people to comprehend. The fact that we are this tiny island, this tiny mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam in this great vast ocean of otherness. That's an easy and dramatic storyline to begin with. So space generally is always going to be very, very popular. And of course, in space, we can visit other planets and we can talk about other galaxies and solar systems, and we can talk about huge numbers. So space is always going to be popular. And also, us as humans, we have a natural desire to explore, and because we've explored space already, we can tell those stories, and that's all really exciting. It's just interesting because things like the quantum realm, the quantum world is really interesting. I think people like the story of just the weirdness of quantum mechanics and quantum physics, but then we also like the big scale stuff as well, of general relativity and Einstein. We like all that. And I think, actually, particularly the 20th century, 20th century physics was there were such amazing characters, and amazing work was done there. It just lends itself to good storytelling. I always put sort of physics and space together in my mind, but I don't think. I think, I'm comfortable. Like, I had a program that was on BBC4 last night called Britain Beneath Your Feet, which was a kind of a geography program looking at how the underground world affects the world on our surface, and it was geography. But I'm as comfortable talking about that as I am talking about space, because ultimately it comes down to good storytelling, interesting storytelling. If something's interesting, I don't mind whether it's about particle physics, space, geology, or climate. A good story is a good story, and a good story resonates, or should resonate with people.
That's a good point to make to younger listeners, that even if you're not doing the best compared to other people in your science exams at GCSE or A-level, it doesn't determine your future of science. Like, you can still enter the science industry, read about science, learn about it.
People always say to me, people say, you're not qualified to talk about science. Well, actually, I'm kind of more qualified. I mean, I studied English and drama at university, which is all about storytelling. And in fact, it's all, and I work in television. That's the medium that I work in. And also, the stuff that I write is story. It's beginnings, middles, and ends. It's inciting incidents. It's structure, and it's a really important thing, to learn. If you want to be a scientist, though, there's no getting away from the hard work of, if you actually want to be a scientist. It's a bit like being a musician, as we said before. If you want to be a musician, you've got to learn how to master your instrument, and you've got to learn music notation. These are all things that I don't need to know if I want to listen to the music and understand it, or even talk about the music. But if you want to be a musician, then you have to learn those things. It's likewise with science. But you're absolutely right. You don't have to. You can be involved in the world of science without being a scientist.
So I did biology, physics, and English for A-level. And everyone asked me, why did you do English? Like, that was such a random choice, such a waste of your time. And I'm like,
but why did I bloody hate it when people say stuff like that? It's a ridiculous. It's such an arse question. It's like, what? Of course you should have studied English. It's like,
exactly.
Are we only meant to be churning out people who? You must be. Why are we so obsessed by having people in little boxes? It's like, right, okay, you've got to do science, and we're humans. We like it all.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, yeah, and there is great beauty and art in science as well. We have a whole. A couple of years ago, I wrote a book about sort of history of spaceflight, and basically that book is kind of an extended poem, really. And the thing that most excited me about the book was the kind of visual aspects, finding all the art and the photography. Finding all the art and the photography and everything else. That's the stuff that really excites me. The other great influence of in my life, I had someone you'll probably know is Werner Herzog, the German filmmaker. Herzog's someone who's absolutely obsessed by science, and it permeates everything he does. This constant exploration of the natural world, and he makes documentaries. But again, he's kind of stands on that border between the sort of fact and fiction, and it's a really interesting kind of place to tread that line. There's great beauty there, where kind of fact turns into fantasy, and fantasy becomes reality, and poetry becomes art. He's another great influence of mine who I like to kind of steal from constantly and borrow ideas from.
Yeah, it's really fantastic. Speaking of your book, if you, I of course I've read it when it came out, because I'm obsessed with human spaceflight. The Apollo missions and everything after that got me into physics and space and everything. That's just my obsession. And so if you were to pick one story of human spaceflight that you wrote about in your book, or not in it, which would you consider to be the best, and why?
Oh God, it's really all of it. I've got a big bookshelf full of books on spaceflight. And actually, I was down at the British Interplanetary Society. They've got a library down there, which if you haven't been to, you must go. Go and knock on the door. It's in Vauxhall. It's near where you live. Go and knock on the door and say, "Can I go into your library?" They've got the most extraordinary library of space books, like massive. And I had this idea of, because it's all beautiful and all fascinating ideas and stories and history and everything else. My sort of goal was to put that entire library into one volume, which is what I tried to do with my book Ad Astra. If I had one story, I don't know, because it depends. It's really difficult. A couple of years ago, I worked on a project with a brilliant director called Chris Riley. We did the history of the spacesuit for a TV show, and actually that story is one that's always fascinated me. How those Apollo suits were engineered and made and crafted, and the history behind them, and the story of the spacesuit is one that I absolutely love. It's a really, really fascinating story. So that's one that I sort of carry around with me a lot. But the history as well, from Tsiolkovsky to von Braun, and German rocketry and after the Second World War, carrying over to America and Russia. All of that I love. I love the fact that when we talk about space history, it encapsulates all of human culture and art and politics and science and religion and the iconography that goes with all that. Is something that's really, really fascinating and rich for me. I love it all. I remember I've been to the Baikonur Cosmodrome a couple of times to watch Soyuz launches. I remember 2015, I think it was, I was there for the Tim Peaks launch. And all the press kind of gather around the Soyuz rocket when it's on the launch pad. And it's interesting, that launch pad, because it's exactly the same launch pad that Yuri Gagarin left from, Sputnik was launched from, Laika the dog was launched from, Helen Sharman was launched from. It's this sort of point, geographical point, that the entire sort of history of human spaceflight, not just human spaceflight, spaceflight generally began from. So it has that wonderful historical resonance. And just before the launch, they have a Russian Orthodox priest who conducts this service in the actual flame trench of the sort of rocket itself, and then comes up and blesses everyone with holy water. And it was such an amazing moment, thinking, gosh, here we are about to send some people into space, and yet this tradition and this guy, this big bearded priest in these priestly robes, comes and does this thing, and here we are trying to sort of reach for the heavens ourselves. And it was that beautiful mix of human ideas and traditions and superstitions, and that really kind of, I see those patterns all the way when I look at stories of human spaceflight, and I like finding those little stories and those ideas and themes.
It's fantastic. I agree. I just love hearing astronaut stories. I feel like every astronaut story that I've read has been completely different. And I went through a phase of reading as many biographies as I could, and every single one had different perspective on it, different opinions about just why they wanted to go into space, their experiences, their mental health throughout space, life after returning, and just different backgrounds, different paths into it. And I feel like the career of astronauts is that every single person has a unique story and unique pathway into it, which is amazing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've been lucky. I've met some of the Apollo astronauts. Very sad and lovely Al Warden, who was the command module pilot for Apollo 15, became a very dear friend of the last few years. And he sadly passed away last week. And it's a great tug on my heartstrings. He was the most delightful, witty, funny, charming, hilarious, never took himself seriously. You know, if you ever want to understand how to do that dreaded word, science communication, go and look at someone like Al Warden. Do it with humility. Do it with a smile on your face. Do it with love in your heart. He was a great. He was one of the greats. Yeah, I love talking to astronauts as well. I'm like you. There's something quite special about them. They're all, as you say, all from different backgrounds and different stories, but they all have that kind of common thread, I think. I've never met an astronaut who I haven't liked. They've all got that sort of spark, that kind of glint in their eye, that sense of humor, that sense of adventure, which I think, you know, you have to have if you want to be an astronaut. You can't have a sense of adventure without having a sense of humor at the same time.
Yeah, for me, I've never really thought about why I love spaceflight and astronomy so much. I think if anyone ever asked me that, I couldn't explain it. It's just the most fascinating, interesting concept. Since I can't remember not. It's been something that I've loved since I was 4. I can't remember not loving it. It's just been my whole kind of life and interest forever.
There is a reason. I don't know. It's like when we're kids, we love it. There's something we just understand. Yeah. And again, it's a bit like, you know, the priest that I mentioned wearing the special robes. And in a way, an astronaut has the same kind of thing. The astronaut wears special clothes and ascends to the heavens to become, you know, closer to the infinite. There is something just incredibly deep and profound about that. And as kids, we recognize that. As kids, we see pictures of astronauts floating in the blackness of space. And it doesn't need any explanation. As children, we're sucked into that. We understand what that means. And so I think, you know, we're lucky in that we never kind of let that go, if you like. We're still fascinated by that. I have a friend, Ryan Nagata, who's an artist who makes props and things for movies, and he makes spacesuits. He did the spacesuits for First Man, and he makes hyper realistic spacesuits. I have one of his Apollo spacesuits, an exact replica of Neil Armstrong's spacesuit, and it's my favorite thing because it's by kind of putting that on, you kind of take on that mantle, if you like. It's a kind of thrilling thing to have. It's such an iconic image that the spacesuit as this kind of portal to this wonderful realm of adventure and poetry and wonder.
Oh, it was my Halloween costume for about 5 years.
Of course.
Every year. Yeah,
everyone should have a spacesuit. Yeah. I will lend you my spacesuit. Exactly. You can borrow it and walk around in it. It's pretty cool.
So, of spaceflight, what do you think the future of spaceflight would be 10 years from now? Do you think it'd be lunar exploration or Mars or anything else, like space elevators even? What do you think?
Whatever I tell you, it'll be wrong because no one knows anything. I mean, the thing is, it's like, we've got the James Webb Telescope, which will open new frontiers, hopefully, and it'll be amazing, and we'll be able to do spectral analysis of exoplanet atmospheres, and we'll be able to see if maybe life exists on other planets. That would be amazing. That will happen, but it keeps getting delayed. I noticed today it's been delayed again because of the COVID-19. Artemis, Mr. Trump, you may have heard of him. He has said, we're going to go back to the moon by 2024. I can't see it somehow. I can't see it happening that quick. Maybe, hopefully I'm wrong. Maybe it'll happen. But I think this pandemic is really putting a bit of a kibosh on the immediacy of lots of projects. But certainly I think in the next decade, we will be going back to the moon, and we'll see the first woman on the moon and the next man on the moon, which will be great. So a lunar outpost of some description will be fantastic. I think the James Webb Telescope, when it's up there and running, will be amazing. I think that's going to be, we'll do a bit like when Hubble went up in the 1990s. Suddenly this kind of window was opened, or the kind of glass was polished, and we could see these incredible images. You know, the Hubble Ultra Deep Field image is such a fantastic image that, you know, changed people's lives and changed the way we see the universe. And hopefully the James Webb Telescope will do the same. I think that'll be really amazing. Who knows? We've got another Mars rover, which has also been delayed, but a Mars rover with a biology package on, which is going to be drilling deep into the Martian surface to look for possible evidence of past life. That would be incredible. I think that's the big question. I think hopefully, I mean, I'm an old fart, but hopefully before I die, my big dream would be evidence of life, either present or past, somewhere else in our universe. That's my hope. It's a very human thing, isn't it, to be able to want to know what else is out there, not just what else, but who else is out there, what other life might be out there. It's a constant drive and a constant thing for science to be able to answer that question.
Yeah, that's very true. How does it feel to just know that you've influenced and kind of inspired so many students into science?
Well,
honestly, I remember
I can't. Well, you flatter me by even asking that question, because it's funny because I have my science heroes. You know, James Burke and Jane Goodall, and you know, when I was kind of interested in this when I was much younger, Johnny Ball, and you know, people on television I used to watch. So, but I don't think of myself. I don't mean this to sound sort of pompous or big-headed. I genuinely don't. I can't imagine being in the same kind of world as those people. So I don't know. But I tell you, the nicest thing that ever happens is when occasionally on Twitter or wherever people say, you know, my son and my daughter used to watch you on Bang Goes the Theory, and they were inspired, and now they've just got an A in their physics A level, or they've gone to university. Like when I hear that, and it's not just me. I mean, there's a whole team of people who made things like Bang Goes the Theory. I'm just a tiny little sprinkle on the top of the cake. But to have been part of a team that has helped people in terms of given them direction in their life, whether it's science or whatever, is the most humbling and the most extraordinary and the most perfect, satisfying feeling ever. So yeah, it's good.
Amazing. Of course, a career in space flight or any STEM career is daunting. Do you have any advice for students who want to work in this industry?
Yeah, just do what you love. Do what you love to do. And then if you do what you love and you're good at it, then you'll never do a day's work in your life. I think that's kind of it. I mean, it's funny actually. I mean, I kind of came quite late into what I'm doing now, I suppose. I mean, I left university and I wanted to be an actor, and I realized after spending quite a lot of time that even though I loved being an actor, I probably wasn't as good at it as I could have been. And it was actually only slightly by chance encounters with people, chance finding a video of Richard Dawkins that I mentioned before, that suddenly the penny dropped and I go, oh, that's what I should be doing. I know what I want to do. This is what I want to do. So those kind of moments, you know, come along rarely, but when they do, grab them. Whenever an opportunity comes along, whatever it is, grab it. It's much easier. Just always say yes. That's my advice. Never say no. Always say yes. Even if you don't want to, even if it's terrifying, say yes. Worry about the consequences later. Okay. Is that good advice? It might be terrible advice. I'm really bad at giving people advice. So.
That's a very good point, actually. Especially in university, all these opportunities are coming. Guys, just take them.
Yeah, take them. Actually, my best bit of advice ever was, as Herzog always said it. He always said, you know, ask for forgiveness, not for permission. That was his bit of advice, which I always like. It's really easy just to go, oh, I shouldn't do this, or just do it, and if something happens, then say sorry.
I love that. I love that.
I think that's a good bit of advice. But yeah, just when opportunities present themselves, which they inevitably will, always take them.
Okay, I'm taking that advice tomorrow.
Take that advice. Tomorrow. Yeah, well, start today. Yeah. Start today. My other bit of advice as well is, it's people who go into, doing STEM careers and that, which is great. Don't forget other things. Don't forget to listen to music. Don't forget to read novels. Don't forget to go to the theatre. Don't forget to be excited by other things in life. I think that's really, really important. If we want to do science for everyone and make everyone feel part of it, let's be interested. Let's be people who are interested in the world and everything that is, not just science. I always, tell young people, it's like, yes, go be a scientist. That's great, but also don't forget to read War and Peace.
Yeah, a well-rounded kind of education in life.
I think so. I think that I'm a big fan of well-rounded education. I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, it's a good point. You have to kind of find this part of science that you love. Because I feel like everyone has that one, if you're doing a science degree, you have that one part that just makes you so happy and excited.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, so for me, it's spaceflight. And the kind of the history of missions and, the command modules and service modules, all that kind of stuff is my favorite thing. And I think, everyone has their one. And I found that when I was like 10, just Googling it and my parents' computer, like Googling the Apollo missions and stuff like that. I think everyone kind of finds their niche in their science degree.
There is something beautiful about Apollo. There's something so special about Apollo, particularly because it came, it came in such a specific time, historically. It was a time of great sort of turbulence, particularly in America. You had Vietnam rolling on at the time. So you had a kind of, this terrible conflict going on in Southeast Asia. You had the Cold War going on, and this kind of moment where everything came together and the technology suddenly came together, and we actually sent people to the moon for a very short amount of time, just for a period of a few years, this kind of white heat, and then it all ended. There's something fascinating about that story and the people involved, how it happened, why it ended, the things that we did there. I agree with you. I just think it's the most compelling, brilliant story.
That's fantastic. I'm just smiling thinking about it. It's amazing how one piece of history can just change your life in a way and just get you so interested into the subject. And then it kind of was a cycle. I was into the Apollo missions and astronomy, and then I was into physics in school. And then because of the space flight and astronomy, and it kind of all just circles around, and it's amazing how science is, again, it transcends just one medium. That's history, not science at all. Well, it is science, but it's the historical aspect.
Well, it's everything.
Stories,
it's history.
It's everything. Yeah.
Yeah, it's history. It's politics. Everyone should read that. The Kennedy's 1962 Rice University speech. The "We choose to go to the moon in this decade." That speech is so amazing. I don't just mean that line, but the entire speech. Everyone should read it. It is so fascinating, so brilliant, and encapsulates that story so well. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to an unknown planet, a planet that we haven't even explored, even in a preliminary way, on a rocket using materials that have not yet been built. And we're going to send a man there. We're going to return him at speeds of 25,000 miles an hour. It's just unbelievable, and we're going to do it. And we're going to do it right, and we're going to do it by the end of the decade. I love all that. It's kind of stirring stuff, and it's amazing and brilliant, and also terrifying as well. What was going on in the world. You had huge civil rights problems at the time, and all that going on in America at the time. It's just a really interesting bit of history, and it's everyone should sort of spend some time, I think, delving into that.
Could not agree more. You've said before, of course, it's the best. You said before that everyone will have their own reason to leave the planet. What would be your reason?
What would be my reason to leave the planet? I think that to get a better sense of perspective. I think that would be it. I often kind of imagine, at night, I imagine sort of closing my eyes, and I imagine standing on the surface of the moon, looking back. And I think that sense of, I've sort of said it a few times now, of stepping back from the canvas to really get an appreciation of what's going on is the most important thing. And actually that's having the Earth in view from the moon, I think that's what I'd like to do, just to see the Earth as a ball in space from the surface of the moon. Robert Goddard, the American rocket engineer, used to have dreams about that as well. He used to dream he was standing on the surface of the moon, looking back at the Earth. And I think there is something really profound about that, being able to see your home, but from that sort of distance. The Apollo, was it Alan Bean, I think, one of the Apollo astronauts talked about sort of holding your thumb up and blocking out the Earth and blocking out everyone who ever lived there. That's, and great, good writers are able, you don't even have to leave the planet to be able to do that. Good writers, Carl Sagan's famous pale blue dots speech, for example, when he talks about, that pixel, that motif, that blue marble, that motif, suspended in the sunbeam. I can't remember how it goes. Good poetry, good writing can do that. It can take you off into wonderful places, and that's why good science writing is so valuable, because it does that. It takes you away. Or good any kind of art does that. It takes you out of yourself and off the planet very often.
What do you think the biggest hindrance to the development of the space sector is right now?
Well, I think the biggest hindrance is probably short political cycles and short political thinking. You have a 4-year American political cycles, and presidents come in and promise the Earth and lots of money, and then their 4 or 8 year cycle ends, and then another president comes in and wants to do something different. So unfortunately, big science projects like spaceflight is at the mercy of political cycles and money, and so that's always the problem. And sort of politics isn't very good at thinking beyond those sorts of years. And so when you've got projects like things like James Webb, which is a sort of multi-decade project, things get forgotten and priorities change. Going back to the moon was Trump's priority number one last year, but of course it's not anymore. He's got sort of other problems, and a bit like Apollo. Apollo is a great example of that. Apollo, it's like, we have to beat the Russians to the moon. This is a matter of national importance. We want to show our technological and scientific dominance over the Soviet Union, and we did that. But then there was no kind of priority. There was no kind of reason to carry. Once that had been done, it slowly faded away, just simply because Apollo was so expensive. So it always comes down to money and politics. I think those are the sorts of hindrance, and geopolitical considerations. Conflicts with other countries who we might have been having big projects with might suddenly change, and human politics is really, really messy, and unfortunately, big science involves big politics because it involves big money and international cooperation. So that's always going to be the kind of, I think, the sticking points. Things like Brexit, it's like, well, there you go. Well, we've got all these kind of international partners and tentacles all together, and suddenly pulling those away creates all kinds of unknowns. So I would say politics is probably the biggest problem.
Couldn't agree more. On that kind of, you said that Ron Jones Flowchart is where the title of your book comes from. Where do you think would be the hardest step in that flowchart to achieve? And do you think we're anywhere near close to being on track for this?
I can't remember that. Oh yeah, Ronald Jones. I love this flowchart. It's such a great. Everyone should print out. Well, everyone should print it out. Well, it's funny when you look down the years how we're not anywhere near any of these things, because when you'll have to explain somehow what the Ron Jones flowchart is basically going sort of decade by decade what we would need to do to become a multi-planetary species, all the kind of science and technology we'd need to overcome. What was your question? What was the thing we need to do the most? Was it?
Yeah. So what do you think that as a species right now we need to do that's most important to get to be an interplanetary? This is a big question. Sorry.
It's a big question. Well, I suppose. I don't know. I mean, I suppose this is why sort of Elon Musk is sort of quite good at all the thinking about all this kind of stuff. He's talking about big star rockets and great spaceships taking us to Mars. I suppose propulsion is probably a big one. Space is big. So getting around it takes a long time, and so that's going to be a big problem. Oh man, there's so many. I don't even know where to start. I mean, we've got to fix our own planet. We've got to, in a way, we have to sort out how we manage our affairs down here, I suppose. I'm having a look at the. God, I'm looking at the Ron Jones flowchart now. Initiate Martian terraforming operations. We're not anywhere near that. Jesus. Hang on. Where are we? 2020. I can't. Oh, I've got a whole bit missed out. So by 2033, Ron Jones reckoned would be Venus exploration by now.
Okay, yeah.
Initiate Earth Moon. What is this? Oh, I can't even read. I haven't got my glasses on. But yeah, I mean, there's it's a great chart to look at to sort of understand where we should be going, where, and also he wrote that chart in the 1980s, so the world has completely changed by then, since then. I mean, politically, so it doesn't. It's very much a kind of relic that chart.
For the budding science journalists, what do you think are the biggest difficulties in the industry at the moment, and do you have any advice on how to face them?
Well, it depends what in terms of what advice in which sort of area. I mean, obviously, it's finding your own voice. I think the most important thing for there's that word, science communicator, is finding your own voice. Very often, you see science, people who are doing impressions of science, what they think science communication is, and actually just being yourself and finding your own, because no one can be you better than you can be you. So don't try and be anyone else. I mean, we all have people that we look up to, and I'm like, oh, James Burke and Carl Sagan, but I'm not trying to be them. So finding your own voice is the thing, and don't be derivative. Don't copy other people. Don't borrow and be inspired by and nod to, but just find your shtick, and whatever it is, do that.
What do you think the best ways to get involved with it in university are? If a student have a full-time job, university.
There's so many more opportunities. When I first started, the internet didn't really exist. There was no social media. So now there's, you've got, in a way, it's harder because there's so much stuff out there. You can do podcasts, you can do, live YouTube broadcast. There's no reason why you can't do it, which puts you under more pressure you've got to do it now. You've got to actually sort of deliver. When I first started, there was kind of television and radio and print. The media was owned but had gatekeepers. Now, of course, there aren't any gatekeepers because you can do your own podcast or vlog or, Periscope, whatever it might be. You can just do it. The thing is to find out what you like doing. If you like writing, if that's your thing, if you like writing and you can find you can express yourself best writing, do that. If you're a show off and like being on telly and prancing about in front of the camera, do that. If you're kind of more spontaneous and you like to, do lots of sort of actuality and whatever it is, and YouTube and the internet is your thing, then do that. If you like more crafted documentaries, go and work for the BBC Science Unit. You have to find what it is that you like to do, and that's not often an easy thing. It might take a bit of time. You might go down one avenue and go, actually, you know what? There's something not quite right here. Maybe I'll try this. Maybe try lots of different things. But there's so many different opportunities now. And I work on a program called Fame Lab with the British Council and the Cheltenham Science Festival, where we run a competition for sort of early career scientists to, just stand in front of an audience and talk about their science. And it's a great competition. There's loads of things like that. Science in the pub, pint of science, all these different things that didn't exist really when I was when I sort of started out. So find your thing, whatever it is you like to do, and do that.
I guess it kind of goes back to your advice earlier about just do it, like just say yes to it and just kind of go for it.
Do it anyway. It's okay. It's okay to be bad. I think that's a really important thing. I think you only get good if you know what being bad is like. That's a really important thing. Write something and it'll be terrible. It should be terrible. And learn how to make it better, or do a piece to camera and it'll be terrible. But you get better and you learn.
That's I guess that's a really good point for like people that are nervous to kind of go into journalism or media or something like that you can mess up and you can be bad and you will make mistakes.
Don't worry about Yeah, don't worry about being bad, and don't worry about being wrong. You know, that's kind of part of it.
I think that's it for today. Thank you so much, Dallas, for joining us. That was really amazing insight on storytelling, the space sector, science, just everything to do with science communication. And on next episode, we have Harriet Brettel, the head of business analytics at Astroscale and the co-chair of the Space Generation Advisory Council. Let us know if you have any comments, questions, concerns, or feedback, and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time at Thursday at 5.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.